In the last 2 or 3 or 4 talks is actually that, and Hype really evaded the question nicely by putting up biologic systems, but nevertheless I want to throw it to the feet of the other people. What according to you is the definition of life, and what according to you is the definition of nature? Who wants to take that challenge up? Adam?
You're asking us that?
Yes.
Wow. Well, I mean, you were just talking about vitalism. Chronic vitalism. I tried. Do I have to hold it?
Chronic vitalism.
Okay. Versus,
I do have to hold it up. Okay. No.
we can do it together.
Yeah. Retouch. You know, the question of life, whether or not it has something special about it that's irreducible to chemistry and physics, whether biology will eventually cease to exist because we will have reduced ourselves to a standard registry of parts. That is a big question. Are there fields in morphological change? I'm talking about secular vitalism. I'm not calling the Godhead down here. I'm just sort of saying that there might be something special about life. I don't know. But I do think that the switching of reading the genome or writing the genome as a language code to an integrated circuit is not a mistake at this time, because the linguists were just starting to get a handle on what it might mean to think of our genome as a language outside of reason, but in the realms of actual hot media language, like James Joyce, like poetry, like our genes might actually be a language, talking, non-linear, hypertext, which is to say alternative editing, multifactorial downstream effects, various other linguistic terminologies that don't lead us to think of the genome as being a registry of parts, but as a conversation with the outside world, between proteins and membranes and organelles, etc. So it being very complex gets reduced once again from code language to integrated circuit. It just seems like a timely movement towards the rationalization. An aesthetic that Daisy was talking about. It's not my aesthetic rationalization, but I have some room for it in the world of aesthetics. It's a twisted, demented process, rationalizing. I kind of like it. But it's a fling for me.
I don't know if I can quite, is that on? I don't know if I can quite follow that as eloquently, but I think it's a similar vein to this idea of the DNA fetishism, that everything is DNA-centric must mean life. And for me, one of my criticisms, or as an outsider looking into synthetic biology, is how it always seems to focus on just the single module, the single E. coli, and it's less about the ecosystem. I think it's probably a shift that will happen, that it's more about the environment it sits in. And that's what's so interesting about protocell synthetic biology, is that you can only exist if you are in context. If a sort of a chemical cell is a unit, it's bounded by its membrane, and that is one of the things that defines it, or could define it, as living. And I mentioned that Sharif Manti in his lab, part of their investigation into making life is trying to define what it is. How do you know when you've made it? Is it just a series of working parts in a membrane? But that actual membrane gives it identity, and is something that isn't really thought of as part of it, but might be quite valuable to the argument.
Okay, we have a microphone running around. Sven, I don't know, do you want to react?
Yeah, why not? Well, I think the question about vitalism, what we had in the last talk, there's another aspect, because the entire discussion is also fueled by people who think that the brain may be something like a transceiver for spirit or something like that. So you have just a few living cells, there's no real spirit, and the human brain is the highest step in the ladder right now and is able to transceive like a receiver, receiving radio signals, receiving spirit or something like that. So the question is, if Craig Venter is building up bacteria, more and more complex systems, are they able to be transceivers like that or not? Because this is what we are implying in principle, that there is a vitalistic component. So do you see this spiritual component? And the Catholic Church will of course love this position, I think.
Well, I'm talking from the point of the engineer's view, just playing the African's devil. That's what I'm trying to do. And if you can reason it down to chemicals, to chemical reactions. People say that love is about chemistry. So if you can bring it down to chemistry, you could, I think. You could, again, make this reductionist step. But I'm not so sure of that.
I worked for a while on a project called the Pinal Extender. It was at Symbiotica out in Perth with Thorny Cats. The Pinal Extender, I grew pineal gland stem cells from neonatal rabbits' brains that I had cut open and taken out the pineal gland, and I made a paste and grew it on this sort of, it was a mixture between an antenna and a butt plug. And the idea was that humans, we received some sort of retrovirus that made our frontal lobes grow very quickly, so quickly that it covered our pineal gland, our third eye, where our optic nerves meet. The pineal gland still receives light data from our eyes and tells us when to wake up and when to go to sleep. But it probably tells us a lot of other things too, like which way is north or south. Birds migrating use their pineal gland to follow north and south paths, and certainly the moonlight on eyelids is known to coordinate menstrual cycles. So we have monthly and yearly cycles, as well as daily cycles, circadian rhythms built into this light sensing organ in the middle of our brain. But because we can't use it as well as other mammals or other organisms that use the pineal gland, we may have a problem receiving the spirit. And so we may need to use artificial means, like a hole here or up the nose, to extend our pineal glands to better receive the cosmos and the message that we're missing due to frontal lobe exaggeration, which is maybe a disease.
Let's get maybe back to synthetic biology. A question that I have is, do we have the right to tamper with nature? Who gave us that right? We ourselves? That's a difficult one.
Can I suggest an answer?
Yeah.
Maybe life can only exist when you have the tension between it should not be done and it should be done.
Would you explain that?
Shall I repeat, or was this clear? So the question is, maybe, or the reflection is, maybe we need the tension between we should and we should not to have enough, let's say, voltage to be able to continue life. And then ultimately leading to a cosmocentric question, is life itself ultimately renewable?
Any other remarks on? Yeah, Karen?
I would like to try and get back to one of the core questions for the entire panel, which is, well, what kind of designs well, bioscience and technology are evolving, so apart from the question, should we or should we not do something, there's this question of function, or this question of direction in which to go. So what kind of design nature do we want? Or to put it differently, what uses do you see for bioscience and technology? And I think Inya Scotti would talk about using it to increase biodiversity, possibly. And maybe, Adam, you would say, I don't know if I want to put this in a functional way and start critiquing the functions that it's used for today. But if we want to move beyond that, do you, or any one of you have an idea, okay, well, I think this would be a good use to put it in, or let's just stop all bioscience and technology right now?
No, I wouldn't certainly stop it. It's just too fascinating, you know. If we do not allow ourselves to play up with our fascination, what will happen to us? So let's play with our fascination, and let's do that, of course, in a responsible way. Let's be constantly very critical about what we're doing, asking ourselves, well, where is this really taking us? And not in the simple way that, of course, it's always good, like that, something that was mentioned by the other speakers. It's always good to do something about health. Yeah, is that really so? Let's discuss that constantly. Is it really good to do something about health always? To what limits? Is there any limits to that? But I wouldn't certainly stop using and trying these human capabilities of designing. Well, call it nature, call it life. I think that's far too complicated. But to use design principles and technologies and find out about what we can do, how we can use it, and what the meaning of it is.
Alexandra?
I just wanted to add something. I agree. I think you can't stop knowledge because it may not be correct as a marketable product. I think that's part of the tension. One of the difficulties I found in my own practice by becoming so embedded within the science is the loss of ability to be critical because you are part of the science. It's not so much loss of ability, but loss of that you give up one thing to gain the other. And I think that science requires that criticality within it, because you can make the stuff, but whether you should or shouldn't needs to be, those are questions that should be being asked directly as part of the research, which is something that one of the kind of forms of practice that I'm testing. And I found something really disturbing last year. I went to the IGEM competition. I was wearing a t-shirt saying, "How would you design nature?" There were maybe 1,500 people there, and not one person asked me what it meant or anything. This was at a genetic engineering competition, and it was kind of completely the assumption. And when we actually came up with that question for synthetic aesthetics, it was one of three questions. One was, how would you design life? One was, how would you design biology? And one was, how would you design nature? We plumped for that one in the end. And I wonder if that question had been different, how people would have reacted to it, because I think that the critical part needs to become part of the actual training of the young scientists. And maybe that's not the way that we're working at the moment with synthetic aesthetics, but it's what we're trying to kind of experiment with.
But can you imagine that, for example, if we say, okay, designing nature, that we stop with bacteria, or that we do bacteria, viruses, and other single-cell organisms, and that we stop there, that we won't go towards multicellular organisms, because for one thing it's too complex technically, and for the other thing is maybe we say, well, ethically, there is the boundary there.
Well, first of all, can I say we're not stopping anywhere. We're actually starting to engineer ourselves right now. It's already a process in motion. It's not something that we can debate the ethics of. It's being done quietly, but it's being done not completely quietly. It's starting to release to the public. The public is presumed to not be ready. And so we have films like Terminator and things like this to get people ready. the question of whether to put your finger in a river and the conflict. You have a finger and you have a river. Some people say the river, you can't put your finger in the same river twice. But if you decide not to put your finger in the river, you can't not put your finger in the same river twice either. And by this I mean two things. Things keep changing without you, and how do I say? It's a choice to do nothing also. In other words, doing nothing has an effect. There is no way to be alive and not have an effect on the world. Is innovation perverted? Yes. Like the edge of science and the edge of art and even the edge of the bedroom and the edge of politics are all novelty. Something new may come of this. And because of that, they have a perverted quality, which is acceptable.
Well, I think that the main difference between Europe and the US is not really public perception, something like that. The main difference is politics. It's a different political system with different powers. Look at the major companies involved in biotechnology. The majority of them is based in the United States. That's where the interest is. That's where the power is. Look at you talked about the large defense programs. Very interestingly, the majority of them is concentrated in the United States. That's where the interest is. That's where the geopolitical interest is. That's my view right now. If you look at public surveys, in general, there is really, really little difference between Europe and the